All right. So good morning. I'm Amanda Bologna, and I'm the Community Administrator for Community and Summer Education. Just a heads up, this will be recorded, as you guys know. And without further ado, I would love to introduce Kate Plows, and she'll be taking over from here.
Okay, I've got screen share, right? So, host disabled attendee screen sharing. Now I'm the co-host. Okay. Okay, you can see that, right? H2GSM, give me a thumbs up.
Good to go.
Okay. So this is weird because I think that the two people who are attending this presentation live probably know more about this than I do to some extent. But I will talk with you about this for the next hour because I'm geeky about it, and Point Park gave me an excuse to talk about it for a while. So I get really geeked up about this stuff. It was one of my favorite parts of advising when I was advising. The slide deck that I'm going to share with you today is a rework of a slide presentation that my editors first created back in 2015. They presented it at the National High School Journalism Convention, then they represented it at Columbia Scholastic Press, and then we used it for staff training for a few years. This is definitely a rework, but I promised them that I would keep their names and their handles on the slide and the hashtag that they created for it. Clicking on that hashtag yesterday when I was going through these slides was a hoot because I got to see the tweets that had been shared with that hashtag over the years. Just on background, so I advised the Friars Lantern at Malvern Preparatory School for 6 years, in addition to teaching ceramics and graphic design at the school for 11 years. So that's why most of the student photo examples you'll see in the slide deck are all boys. Malvern was an all boys Catholic private school. In 2018, I took a detour and I left Malvern Prep to go back to public education. I now teach art, mostly photography, at Strathaven High School in Delaware County, PA, and the gender breakdown in many of my classes is very different these days. I'm not an advisor these days, and I'm both sad and sometimes a little salty about it, but that's another story for another day. I stay very engaged with social media though. I teach photography now, and my students run a Humans of Strathaven account. I coach them up so that they are almost completely in charge of that account at an introductory level to the class. I do some freelance work for a tutoring company. When you see tweets and shares on PSPA's account, that's usually me behind the scenes. And lately I have been doom scrolling as much as the rest of the United States. And I'm surprised at how much I'm learning from that experience, good, bad, and ugly. As student journalism nerds, we're all familiar with the 5 W's and the H. And if you're thinking through strategy for how to use social media, I'd say that if you have firm answers to the why, the who, and the how of what you're going to share and how you're going to do it, the what, the when, and the where will really take care of themselves. This presentation is not a how-to guide, nor is it inclusive of all of the different social platforms your publication might choose to use. That would be a much longer slide deck. This is mostly designed to get you thinking about some strategies and some of the questions that you should be asking when your publication embarks on using social media tools. I would say that the best advisors that I know are mainly questioners in chief. You want your students to have the agency over what they publish and share. You're the person who gets to ask all of the journalistic integrity questions about how they're doing it. So our publication used social media tools for 4 main purposes, and we agreed on these purposes each year in training, in our meetings, as we revisited them throughout the year. A social media post always had to fit into one of these 4 categories. If it didn't fit into one of these 4 categories, I would make a case that it probably shouldn't be going on our platform. So breaking news, building engagement, sharing the stories that were published on their website, and promoting the program. So we're going to look at a couple of examples of each of those, how they can work. Breaking news can be really valuable, and it's what many professional news organizations seem to use their social accounts for a lot these days. But school level breaking news can also incite anxiety, and the stakes can feel just as high as professional news if you get it wrong. So this is an example of how that played out on our staff. One day back in 2015, police cars appeared at the front of the school, and students saw it, our editor-in-chief saw it, and posted to the Slack channel, "Here's a picture, we can put it out on Twitter." And I was the integrity person in that case who said, why? Why do you want to put it on Twitter? Well, people need to know. What do they need to know? That there's a police car at the front of the campus. Well, they can see that. They'll see that there's a police car at the front of the campus. What else do you want them to know? And that led us, over the course of 15 minutes, to point him in the direction of finding a school administrator to get a quote as to why that police car was at the front of the school, that he was then able to attribute. Don't make your readers ask you according to who or who said that. Answer that in your social shares for them. Attribute everything, just like you would in a news story. This is playing out on a lot of publications' social media accounts these days, as the news about what's happening with our schools seems to change by the day. I follow and love the Passac Valley Smoke Signal out of New Jersey. They broke the news that graduation ceremonies would be able to happen as Governor Murphy announced it in New Jersey, and they attributed it to him with a tag. Building engagement. So you want to share content that your readers will like. You want to share content that they will engage with. You want to share content that your readers will be proud of. You want to do shares that will lead readers to further explore your site. Well, 2 examples here. Our publication did a college map each year. But when they put it out on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, they took the resolution down on that image just enough that you couldn't really read the names when you zoomed in. They didn't want people to read that zoomed in on their phone. They wanted them to go to the site. Now, Instagram is not the best for getting people to click on your site because it doesn't allow for a link in the text that you share, in the caption that you share with a post. But you can put a link for an Instagram post in the bio and get people to click on it that way. So that was a post that drove people to the site for engagement. Daily Collegian out of Penn State had this up on their story yesterday. I've missed my summer trip to State College this summer to get some ice cream at the Creamery. So I loved this post where they were engaging readers. What's your favorite flavor at the Creamery? And then the next post on that story was a new social media platform that they're using for their site. So they led people to engage through the flavors of ice cream, and then they led them to the Spotlight app. I would argue, and I'm not the advisor at my current school, but I've made this argument that in order for a publication to reasonably justify having a website, you need to have a way to share your stories, which means you need social media accounts. You can have a beautifully designed school news website or school yearbook website or broadcast website, but unless you have a way to point people to visit that site, you're not going to get engagement on your content. Social media gets the links to your stories into your viewers' hands. And there's a craft to writing tweets and posts and shares that are going to get people to click on that link. You can study this engagement over time to see what works best for your specific audience. We experimented with screenshots of text. We experimented with pictures. We experimented with video. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the ways that you can monitor that engagement and start to learn what works best for your audience. But really, the great thing about social shares is that they can include, at least on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram, if you have a big enough audience, you can share links to your content and get them to click on that story on your website, and that's what you want to use it for. Even broadcast. Now, I don't know who Matt Lev is, but I would be curious as to whether Matt Lev's Twitter handle was the best way to engage people in clicking on that link. Maybe it is. Maybe Matt Lev is popular enough or known well enough that that would be the best way to get people to click on that link. And promote your program. We put up an Instagram post every time we set an issue to press. We tried to get as many people in the room for that final send off of the issue as possible and get them to all have their fingers on the touchpad together when we send it out. If you're trying to build interest in your publication staff, you want people to see it as someplace fun to be, as someplace that people want to be part of that team. And that's a place where I often see advisors jumping in and doing some shares, sometimes publications retweeting their advisor, which I love. There's the Shawnee yearbook, waving their yearbooks in the air when they're trying to get people to come to school to pick them up well after the end of the school closure. There's so many neat things that staffs do to make their publication team look enticing, look fun, look like a place where people want to be. And in a school, when you're competing with a lot of other priorities, that's something that's kind of important. I have to say the yearbook distribution tweets this year were epic. There were so many creative things that staffs tried to do to get students to come back to the school when school was closed, because they wanted to see those people when they handed them their yearbook. They wanted to have that moment. So there were so many really creative posts that went out there at yearbook distribution time this year. I'll show you a little bit later. JEA, Journalism Education Association, has an entire curriculum for social media. They break down the purposes a little differently: alerting, searching, verifying, feedback, and inviting. The goals that our staff had fit well into those, but the neat thing about the JEA curriculum is that there's really a lesson plan for each one of those for exploring how it works. I would say that the important thing is that you and your students know the why, and that you've defined the why for your own unique publication and that publication's audience. Also this, from a more meta perspective, why should we be teaching and learning about social media? Not just on publication staffs, but in schools in general, because our world leaders are using it to communicate. And our students' ability to dissect and understand the whys of those messages has never been more important. But again, that's a much longer slideshow for another day. Okay, so the question who really takes two strands. Who is your audience, and who are the people who are going to manage your accounts? So let's look at both of those. To really understand your audience, it's really important to understand your role at the school. When you're starting to decide on how your social media accounts are going to work, take a look at the other accounts that your school officially runs, and take a look at the other accounts that students run at the school. You want to think about what your publication's role is going to be. Some schools have robust communications departments. Some schools are starting to build robust communications departments because during COVID, strategies for communications have never been more important. So advice from experience: don't ever try to compete with the communications department or with the athletics department. Carve a niche for the social media account that you'll create. The best thing to emphasize is student voice. The communications feeds at Malvern Prep They had a whole staff. They had a whole office. And they had a very carefully crafted and strategic message to promote the school. So the social shares that we put out had to be distinct from that. Otherwise, we were competing, and nobody likes competition, at least not there. Many social media platforms have some sort of analytics tool that helps you to learn more about the audience that your posts are reaching. So this is a really great way to engage that math or data geek on your staff. I always had a few. I always had at least one on our team at Malvern. So you can see who's clicking on your tweets, who's engaging with your Instagram post, who's engaging with your content on Facebook. All of the platforms have some sort of analytics tool. You can learn how to use them. You can also learn how to tweak your message to reach a different audience. So looking at my own personal Instagram reach right now, the majority of my posts are coming from Philadelphia because that's where my circle is right now in this area. I was thinking, you know, if I really wanted to try to reach that Pittsburgh audience, I probably could hashtag Sheets a couple of times instead of hashtagging Wawa. I think that would work. That might boost my Pittsburgh statistics up if I wanted to do that over a course of the week. What a fun thing for your students to play with. Have them set a goal. I want to reach this audience, or this week, I want to reach women. This week, I want to reach people who are over 50. This week, I want to reach people who are under 18. And see if you can strategically make little changes in the hashtags you use, the type of content that you post, the way you cover things to reach the audience that you want to reach. When I was advising, we treated all of these platforms effectively like social media, and all of them had a way to monitor the audience. That could be a full-time job, though. In fact, I'll make the case that it is a full-time job for people who make more than I do as a teacher these days. So it's important to decide how much time you and your team really want to spend on it. How much time you want to spend on it is a bit of a misnomer. Okay, most controversial opinion that I'm gonna posit in this slideshow is that students should be the ones producing the content and monitoring the channels. Do not host a channel that will be advisor run. A student publication is not the district PR channel. So there's educationally sound reasons for this. You know, in any case, you want your students to be the ones who are doing the most learning from the experience. There's also career and safety implications for this. If your students are the ones producing the content, when they make a mistake, you can say, we're learning, right? We can pull out the sports metaphors. You can say, this is just like when the quarterback missed that pass at the very public football game the other night, right? In order to practice and to do this well, we're gonna make mistakes. We're gonna correct them when we do. But if you're the person as the advisor who's putting out the content, that mistake falls back on you. There can be real implications sometimes if you make social media mistakes for teachers, as I think we all know. And when I look at the Pennsylvania social media feeds for our publications, I often wonder how many of those publications involve students producing the content and how many of them are advisors posting the content. I fell into the trap. My first year of doing it, I was engaged in producing content. Not after the first year, though. I learned my lesson, and my students helped me to learn my lesson there. Invest in training your students instead. Send them to a workshop. Have them take on assignments where they look at other publications' feeds. Train them yourself. Coach them up yourself. Invest in training your students so that they're going to be the ones who do a really good job of it. Co-monitoring, in my opinion, is okay. I had the accounts on my phone when I was advising. I still have the Humans of Strathaven account on my phone too. That's a way that if a comment comes up on a post or if something seems a little bit out of whack, I can get in touch with my editors and say, hey, what's up? I think you need to handle this. Having multiple people co-monitoring a channel can basically just adds to your defenses if something goes wrong. But your job as the advisor is to be a great coach, not to be the person who's actually creating the media, and to ask those journalistic integrity questions that students might not have been considered. You need to be able to trust your team. You also need to trust that they are probably going to know more about the platforms that will reach their audience than you do. So an example, when I was advising, I dug my heels in for about 2 years on Snapchat. I wasn't sure. I had journalistic integrity questions about Snapchat. I was concerned that the stories only lasted for 24 hours. How can that be a rough draft of history, I would ask. How can we reflect back on and source what you captured in the moment if it's going to be gone in 24 hours? Back of my mind, although I often didn't say it, how am I going to respond if an administrator calls us on the carpet for a Snapchat story when that Snapchat story no longer exists? Publications are starting to figure this out for TikTok. Right now, TikTok really confuses me. Here's how we got there. I coached the editors up to set some guidelines for how we were going to use Snapchat. So there was a rule. In order to use Snapchat for reporting, staff members were expected to save the story, which you could do very easily. People just had to learn how to do it, and share it out on at least one other platform. Sometimes that was Twitter, sometimes that was Instagram, sometimes those stories got embedded in published stories on our site, used to enhance that content. But that was our rule. That was sort of our compromise that we reached in order to make sure that those stories had integrity. And speaking of team, you really need to build that team with your staff, because as advisor, you never want to be the censor. We all know that. That's not our job. That's not our role to be the censor. So the Smoke Signal recently had to make a really tough call on their Instagram account, and I think on at least one of their other platforms too. They turned the comment feature off. Now their principal asked them to do it. They're in the middle of some tough conversations there right now about changing a mascot, as I know several schools are. And the comments that were being posted on their Instagram feed were getting a little bit out of control. So the principal said to the advisor, you need to make sure that those comments aren't happening. You need to turn that off. Well, the advisor, he's a great guy. He's a great coach. He said, I need to talk to my staff. And because they had built a team who was running those social media accounts, he was able to talk to his staff and coach them up to make a good decision. Now, they could have defied the principal's call. They could have pushed that. They could have pushed back on that. But instead, his staff chose how they were going to do it. They chose how they were going to present it. They chose the other types of coverage that they were going to do around the same topic. And I think they were pretty successful because they had that team built. It was a staff decision. It was not an easy one, but because the students and the advisor had built a trusting team, they were able to make that decision and communicate it in a way that actually built support for the work that their publication was doing. So a tip on the how: name a social media editor and let them build a team. It's a great position to have. In high school, leadership roles matter for students, and having that role on your resume is something that can boost them. But it's a funny thing. I may or may not be doing a little bit of job searching these days, so I can confirm that social media editor is a real world, career-worthy title that can help open doors for students in the future. Our first social media editor, Ben, ended up running social media accounts for several organizations when he was in college, and he's now working at Wawa as an engineer, but he's also consulting with them on some strategic communication things, which is really fascinating. Ben helped us to create a too deep rule on our social accounts. So every tweet, every share got feedback from at least one other staffer before it was posted. Sometimes that was me. It was better when it wasn't. We used a Slack channel for that. There's all sorts of communication channels that staffs use for things like that. But once Ben or the other social media editor would train somebody up, it would add them to that Slack channel and they would be sort of in that feedback. And it was oftentimes it was screenshots, you know, screenshot of this tweet. Does this look okay? And somebody else would chime in, maybe check your spelling. This saved us from lots of spelling errors, grammar errors, context errors along the way, and it's a strategy that I highly recommend. If you are lucky enough to be teaching a journalism class, social media stories can be assigned. We used kind of a choice board for this. I never wanted anyone in my one semester senior elective journalism class to feel like they were forced to create social media coverage. Some of them didn't even elect to be in the class. So forcing them to go out and cover a meeting or go out and cover a theater event, that felt like a lot. So there were other ways that they could accumulate the same points using this sort of choice board strategy, but a lot of them did choose to cover social media. And what I loved about this is that students who really didn't consider themselves to be student journalists got to try something new. There was just enough authentic pressure because of audience, because it was going out to a real world audience, that they usually did a really remarkable job of it, sometimes even surprising themselves. And then the next day when they would come back into class and we would put their Snap story up on the screen and talk about it, and they were like really proud of what they had done. So just an example, Jordan, he really struggled with spelling. So when we were talking before the story, we coached him up to put the whole cross-country team's roster on the text app on his phone before he went out to the meet. Like he just copied and pasted it from the website. So he had every runner's name spelled correctly on his phone before he went. And then he took along a friend who came with him, who was kind of like that person right next to him who was checking the content before he posted it. He had one spelling error in his whole story. I was so proud of him when he did it. If you would like to borrow or adapt this handout, it worked well for us. It was a kind of a neat way that they could sort of accumulate points. Just reach out to me after the presentation and I'm happy to send it to you. So after you've gotten the who, what, and the why, the who, why, and how answered for your strategy, that's when the what, the when, and the where really start to take care of themselves. So when you start to think about what, when, and where you'll cover, you want to coach your students to explore other accounts and how they're doing it. Borrow ideas. If you follow PSPA on Twitter, there's a list on the PSPA account of all of our PSPA member schools and other Pennsylvania publications. You can have them go through that list and see what their peer schools are doing. I'm addicted to following student publications on Twitter and Instagram. It's kind of like my my antidote to doom scrolling. Like I love seeing what they're doing. I have a notebook that I keep some ideas in case I'm ever going to be able to do this again. This past week, the GIF on the right here, this past week I started following the New York Times on TikTok because I figure I need to start learning what TikTok is so that I can ask good questions about it down the road. I still don't know what it is, but I'm starting with following a couple of major publications to kind of get the hang of it and see what they're doing, because I anticipate that if I'm advising again, or even if I'm not advising again, I'm just coaching students in whatever capacity I'm coaching, the TikTok question is going to come up. I'm learning. There is so much you can cover at a school using social media. And the social media coverage, the in the moment tweets, photos, and shares often becomes the primary sources for the more in-depth coverage that your staff will create later. You can get quotes on Twitter. You can snap photos that you share on an Instagram account at the art show that later get integrated into the story that you're going to publish when you're choosing what events are going to get story coverage in your book or in your news website. If you have an active daily social media feed, the coverage calendar basically takes care of itself. So a couple of strategies for that. Build a coverage calendar, put it up on the wall. List the events that are coming up at school, weekly, monthly, and try to boost social media contributors into covering as many as possible. I should have said this at the start. The publication that I advised at Malvern was fully extracurricular. We were able to integrate some things in from that journalism elective class that I ran one semester each year. But most of the time, the publication was fully extracurricular, running out of a homeroom. So we had to find ways to sort of make the coverage enticing, make it appealing for students to want to contribute to the social media feeds in order to build coverage on a regular basis. Embrace adventure, embrace creative approaches. I could have not come up with this in a million years. When there were rumors that LeBron James was going to send his kid to Malvern Prep, there was even a billboard that went up about it. It was the strangest thing. I wasn't really sure. The editors-in-chief weren't really sure that it really deserved its own full feature story. But a social media editor came up with the idea to just get a quote from the basketball coach. And in that quote, he dispelled the rumor, but he called it good press for the team. I trusted his instincts on how he wanted to push that quote out, how he wanted to share it on social media accounts. And that quote ended up getting picked up by the Philadelphia Inquirer to dispel the LeBron James bringing his kid to Philadelphia rumors. You want to build incentives for regular coverage. Talk to your editors-in-chief, talk to your social media editor about what those incentives look like. Tweet of the Week award, anything goofy like that. Some kids will do anything for a candy bar. What can you do to make, aside from the intrinsic value of knowing that your story helped people get the news, helped people to understand an event, helped people to learn about something. What are the other types of incentives that you can build inside your team to keep kids engaged with creating content on a regular basis? And like I said, my editors-in-chief, they would always tell me when incentive strategy that I came up with was way too cheesy, or when it might work, or when they were just going to bring donuts for everybody the next day. Train your staff to use schedulers. Most teenagers don't know that schedulers exist. So this might be something where you as advisor learn a little bit about it and then teach the students how to do it. So this morning I used TweetDeck. Actually last night at about 11 o'clock, I used TweetDeck to schedule a tweet at 9:05 a.m. about this presentation, right? So you can, what we would do typically, we had a homeroom. So scheduled posts would go up on TweetDeck or on later for Instagram in the morning during homeroom. And we would schedule them for times when students would have their phones in hand. Often lunchtime, often right after school. They started to learn the best times. Our Humans of Strathaven account published a post at 3:15 p.m. every day of this past school year. 3:15 p.m. was the time when most students re-engaged with their smartphones after school. I love TweetDeck, it's just free. Hootsuite does something similar. Later is free for up to 100 posts. It's a great scheduler, particularly for Instagram. It gives you a lot of control over how you're going to post that up. Again, if you want a little bit more in depth on any of these platforms, you can talk to me. I also use a scheduler for the freelance accounts that I run too, because ain't nobody got time to put posts up every day when you're working freelance on a 1099. So I'll schedule out all of the content for the week starting on Monday. Then my job is basically to monitor if any comments or responses come in. and celebrate engagement. Every engagement matters. If you have a WordPress website, Weebly website, there are ways to monitor where your hits to the website are coming from. And that can be a really fun thing to share with your students periodically, or to have them share with the rest of the staff periodically. You can see, you know, where your hits are coming from. You can see whether your hits are coming from Twitter, whether they're coming from Facebook. I had a social media editor once who put two other staff members, put one of them on the Twitter account and one of them on the Facebook account, and faced them off on who was going to get the more hits in a month. When you taught at an all boys school, anything that you could do that was competitive worked really well. So who's going to get the most hits from Twitter this month? Who's going to get the most hits from Facebook this month? So it was a lot of fun. You can also see on websites where, basically where all of your hits are coming from. And to the very last day that I was involved with that website, we were still getting hits from abclub.com. Funny story, we had a priest at the school who had married Gwen Stefani. Like, he did Gwen Stefani's wedding. He was the priest with that. And No Doubt stories linked back to our website to prove that she had been married in the Catholic Church. So we would get like a couple of hundred hits a year from No Doubt sources, which the students laughed at, but it was also kind of a neat, like, this is introducing them to the world of how the internet works effectively. So they get to see, you know, like, why do we want to build hyperlinks into our stories? Because maybe down the road, somebody from No Doubt is going to link back to our content, which is always kind of funny. Okay, so some lessons I learned, and this is just kind of a hodgepodge of lessons, strategies, tips that I learned from advising social media with mixed degrees of success over 6 years. 1, keep a passwords file. For us, it was a Google Doc. It had all of the passwords for our account. It had the passwords when they changed. The editors-in-chief had that document. I had that document. The social media editor had that document. And then when the staff turned over each year, as part of our turnover ceremony, the new editors were shared on that document. If you search the Friars Lantern on Twitter, this account still comes up. It was when the publication first got started, before I was engaged with it. A student created a social media account for it to a website that no longer exists. Nobody knows the password for this account. Nobody knows how to get access to it. Twitter is notoriously uncooperative with things like this. So you want to avoid having abandoned accounts if possible. If you're no longer going to use a social media account for your publication, shut it down. And having that passwords list enables you to be able to shut things down if you need to down the road. Develop and use a contract. Again, this is a document that I'd be happy to share with any of you to modify or adapt for your own staffs. My editors-in-chief actually developed the social media policy, and then I kind of worked back and forth with them on it a little bit. When I started having students from the journalism class publishing stories and content, we wanted to have a contract that made that feel a little bit more official for them. We also wanted to have sort of a fallback if they did something or posted something that wasn't okay. We could pull that contract and have that conversation in person. That happened once in 3 years of doing it this way. But the contract had 2 levels. They signed here, and then if they were going to do just a single account or a single event, they would fill out this bottom part of the form and just use it for that single event. So all of the staff members who are going to be contributing to social media over the course of the year, they all signed a contract. But then for individuals who are just going to do a single event or a one-time gig, they just would use the bottom part of this form. this may be the second most controversial thing that I say in this presentation. Carefully consider followbacks and be consistent in whatever your staff decides. For me, for our staff, because I was on all of the accounts, because I was one of the people who was helping to monitor the account, I laid a hard line on this. I told the students, you can follow back if their account is public. If their account is not public, do not follow back. Do not request to follow back. And also be judicious with the account, the public accounts that you do follow back. If you take a look at that student's account and you find that it has posts on the account that are inappropriate in any way, don't follow it back. You guys know with law, the way it is, as teachers, social media can be a little sticky. It's why we don't follow our own students on social media. If I see somebody on social media doing something dumb or doing something that would potentially harm them or others, I have a responsibility to report that. And frankly, I don't want that responsibility. I already have enough responsibility in my role as teacher. So once we would talk about that at the start of each year, they got it. They understood. But the gut impulse is, I want to have as many followers as we can on these accounts. Teenagers like followers. So we'll follow everybody back, and then more people will follow us. A lot of the social media accounts at my school, even the official ones, follow students back. I don't like that. Humans of Strathaven does not follow students back for that reason. Because again, I think it adds an extra layer of responsibility on advisors that I don't think any of us really want or need. Think before you share. I'm going to give a virtual high five to Erin for over text preventing me from live tweeting our school board meeting last night. It would have been a thoughtless impulse for me to do that. But teenagers are impulsive. They're impulsive. Social media coaching is one of the places where we can coach them to be just a little less impulsive and think through consequences of what they're going to share. So this is my Malvern example. This is how the Malvern Prep Student Council lost their Twitter account and their Instagram account for 2 years. If you can see my mouse right there, that girl who's in the middle of the crowd is Tiff Bannister. She's a porn star. They invited her to come to a football game. And then the student council account posted out images of Tiff in the stands. Now, we can make lots of arguments for, censorship and First Amendment rights and free speech and all of those things. But let's face it, at a private school, they have none of those things. And the student council account also has an image to uphold that's a little bit different from a publications staff in some ways. When this post went out, the advisors changed the password on the account and students lost access to it for the next 2 years. It was thoughtless. It was just careless. They thought they were being funny. They didn't think through all of the other implications that would go with that post. I don't know that they ever got that account back. When I look at it now and I read the posts, they read to me like the advisors are creating these posts. They're just a little bit too clean. I'm not sure, but I know there was a lot of trust lost when that happened. Mistakes will happen. Develop a correction strategy. So the New York Times makes mistakes on social media just about a couple times a week. When they do it, they post a correction strategy. We've deleted a previous tweet to this story that incorrectly did this. You want to look at examples of mistakes that other publications make on social media and develop a strategy with your staff as to how you're going to handle them when they do, because they will. If you're putting out lots of content, you will make mistakes. You will spell a name wrong. You will post an incorrect link. You will get a fact wrong. And, I don't want to say normalize mistakes because we never like making them. You want your students to understand that mistakes have consequences. But if you have a strategy to deal with them, that you all feel confident in that strategy, then you know how to handle it down the road. Sports games this is a publication, a student publication. Correction on the tweet. This is Greek to me. I don't understand football at all. I really don't understand how it works, but I'm guessing that they got something wrong in how the football game was being covered, so they corrected the tweet. Hashtag awareness. My editors found this example the first time we posted that we did this presentation. DiGiorno Pizza put out a hashtag why I stayed. You had pizza. Seeing that the hashtag was trending. The hashtag was actually trending because it was related to domestic abuse and they had to issue an apology. So I deliberately clicked on hashtag H2GSM this morning because I wanted to make sure that that hashtag hadn't been used for anything else over the last 3 or 4 years that would kind of change its integrity. If you're going to use hashtags that are unusual or that are trending, make sure that your staff understands why they're trending before you use them in a post or a share. Celebrate birthdays, celebrate top 10s, celebrate timeline highlights. I loved celebrating birthdays, or coaching the staff to celebrate the birthdays, because we talked a lot on our staff about building a positive social media footprint. And when they would put up a birthday tweet with a link to that student's portfolio of stories, that added to that positive footprint for that student. So when somebody would search, mentions of Jack McClatchy, his portfolio of stories that he had published would appear in his results. Monitor, monitor, monitor. If you don't have the resources to be able to monitor responses to a social media account, think about whether you should have the social media account. It was one of my favorite examples. In a print edition of our paper, we made a typo, pretty serious typo. I actually think it was a prank typo. It was supposed to be Roper has been teaching at Malvern for 39 years, and it ended up being Roper has been pooping at Malvern for 39 years. This was brought to our attention by a tweet from a parent 10 minutes after our issue went live on the website. And I didn't catch it. I was in class. I was teaching ceramics. Student editor caught it, came running breathlessly into the ceramic studio with a pass from another class in hand. KP, I could laugh on it looking back, but I would have hated to think about what would have happened if that tweet and that error had been out in the world for even a couple of hours before we caught the mistake. So you want to make sure that you have somebody engaged in monitoring your social media accounts at all times. Those what if conversations, like how would we handle this if this happened, make for great strategy and ethics conversations at the start of the school year or throughout the school year as you're doing training. Humor can be okay. When it's balanced by smart choices and lots of integrity, you need to know your audience. I still don't know what this tweet means. Again, I taught at an all-boys school that was known for its athletics. But my social media editor assured me that it was funny, that it was harmless, and that it would get a lot of engagement, that it was actually supporting a great football player on our team. I thought, okay, do it. And it did. It engaged people who ordinarily wouldn't engage with our accounts. Our head of school telling students not to walk across the grass and then walking across the grass. I wasn't okay with this one at first, but then they said they would tag him and he would be in on the joke, and he was. They knew their audience, they knew their school, and it worked pretty well. Okay, just a couple of resources for learning more. If you are a member of the Journalism Education Association, you have access to their whole curriculum on their website. This is actually under the marketing section of their curriculum, but they have an amazing social media curriculum on their site. The PowerPoints are all there. The strategies for in class are all there. The conversation starters. It's a really great module if you want to do some teaching on this in class. National Scholastic Press Association, a few years ago, they started doing a Best Use of Social Media award as part of the Pacemakers. Going to this page and scrolling through some of the winners can give you a ton of really good ideas, not just for ways to use social media, but also the students have to package their social shares over the course of the year. Sometimes they'll do that with a website, sometimes they'll do that with a presentation, sometimes they'll do that with like a Prezi, and even just the strategies for sharing them are really powerful and really engaging. Okay, so I think, oh my gosh, 9:50. I did it. I did it. I could talk about this stuff for the rest of the day, weeks, really. I'm geeky about it. But if you have questions, if you want the presentation, if you want any of the handouts, if you want to talk more about strategies, that's how to get in touch with me. If any one of those former student editors get even one follow out of this presentation, that'll be a fun conversation to have with them. They're all living their lives and doing their careers right now, but they were really excited that this is still living. And I'll open it up if the handful of you are here. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay.
Hey, Aaron.
One question that I have, and this is something that I know I've struggled with as an advisor, and I know my staff has struggled with, is, when you're teaching your students to report news and they're publishing news and trying very hard to avoid bias and, and things like that. And then some of those same students are managing our social media accounts. As you know, and as you should there, like, some of the best engagement that you're going to get comes from celebrating certain things and posting certain things that are going to get a lot of likes and shares and stuff like that. What's your advice on like finding a balance between like your publication reporting news and avoiding bias whenever you're printing something, but then publishing something on social media that, by all counts is, celebratory or cheerleading in nature and stuff like that.
It's
showing them how to do that,
I'll tell you, last week, I was part of the inaugural class of the New York Times teaching project, and we talked about this. They shared their social media guidelines for reporters, which is a ongoing living document. Like they're making changes to it all the time based on feedback. I think the professional news organizations are trying to figure out the answer to that question. And I think the answer is going to be different for every publication. I'm not trying to evade your question, but that answer is going to be different for Freedom High School Press. It's going to be different for The Spoke. It's going to be different. If the Friars Lantern ever still tweeted, it would be different for them. You have to know your audience, and you have to have ongoing training with your staff engaging in those questions, right? The power of having a conversation with a room full of teenagers about, does that post show bias? And if it does show bias, how does that affect our ability to report the news objectively? Ask the questions, have the conversation, and don't know that you're not always going to get it right. Because we're all still learning. We are all still learning how to do this. Balancing engagement with objectivity, like that's the whole financial bubble of the news right now, right? Like, if you think about it, like on a macro scale, that's why we're having problems in a lot of places. So I think we're teachers, so engaging the students in conversations about the whys is probably more important than getting it right. Wasn't a good answer, but I don't really have a good answer to it because it's something that we're all still trying to figure out. It's not a reason though to avoid trying it. And that I had to have that conversation with the administrators occasionally, like, just because this is a little bit scary and the answers aren't always black and white doesn't mean that we shouldn't engage students in using these tools that the whole world is using right now to communicate.
Kate, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I was talking to my EIC, and they're kind of off Twitter right now, and I'm just wondering, like, if you were limited to 3 social media platforms, what would you say are the 3 that are must-have?
Instagram is where I think a lot of them are
Mm-hmm.
right now. Instagram for sure. I would say Twitter for the educational purpose of it, because again, world leaders and national publications are communicating on Twitter. So there's a teaching aspect there. Like, I don't think Twitter is going away anytime soon. So I would say probably Instagram, Twitter, and they're still on Snapchat. I think they might be going more to TikTok these days. It might be worth investing in figuring out how to use TikTok, because I think that's where a lot of them are spending a lot of time. But it would probably be for me, it would be either Snapchat or TikTok, not Facebook, unless your target audience is their parents. In which it might be. Your publication staff might decide that one of the groups they want to read and engage with their publications most is their parents, and in which case, then yeah, they should probably be learning how to use Facebook. But I think those would be my 3: Insta, Twitter, and what do your students say?
Well, we've just had that change of staff too, and as you're probably aware, we're having a lot of changes happening.
Yeah.
They just stop. I guess they were not embracing Twitter anymore. And thank you for your presentation, because it made me look at Twitter a little differently. And you're right. I mean, this is what who is using every day. So I'm going to have to talk to them about that. But I'm sort of thinking TikTok as well, because there's some really great stuff, like the New York, like you said, you start following the New York Times, and is it the Washington Post who has like a really good one too? That's really excellent. So I think maybe TikTok could be the way. Mm-hmm. Our kids are all over Instagram. That seems to be their thing. And of course, Facebook is dead for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also saw you had YouTube up there. We never even thought about using YouTube.
Well, YouTube really isn't necessarily defined as a social media platform. It's just how we chose to use it. Like building a regular content schedule on YouTube. We never really got effective at it, but if you treat it as, people subscribe to a YouTube channel. So mm-hmm. if you have 2 students who are going to do a regular little talk show on YouTube, and you get people to subscribe to that channel, well, then they sign into YouTube, that comes up in their feed. They see that at the top of their feed. So, I think you can treat it as social media, because I think some people are logging into YouTube and using it like they would a social media channel. It's just a matter of building content that you can do on a regular basis,
Right. And that's the thing, getting the consistency. I think that's a tough thing when you're working with students, to get that consistency. Yes. With all social media, honestly. They're really hot for a while, and then they sort of let it slide, and you have to nudge.
Yep. It's
part of the job, though.
Yep. And their kids and their interests. we can learn a lot from the way their interest is waning. You know, like I gave up on Facebook because I couldn't convince them to put up Facebook posts anymore. And I learned from that. Like they know what their peers are doing. They know what they're looking at. Trusting them, but asking good questions. It's a good strategy.
This has been great though, because there are so many things that I've kind of forgotten about or didn't think about. And it's nice to have this, Kate, thank you, to sort of strategize for next year.
Sure. Well, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kate. This was great. Actually, Heidi asked me if you could send us over the social media handout that you were referring to.
Yep.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Yep. Will do.
Yeah, this is really, we're kind of new in the world of social media since we're working by department at our university. So fish out of the water here. So this is great.
I mean, you know, there could be a whole course. There are whole courses just in this, like trying to focus this into something that I could do in an hour. Like I want to go, if I want to talk about the creators, I want to talk about Spark, I want to talk about Canva, I want to go into scheduling, I want to go into look at, I want to go into looking at like all of, you know, let's look at the top 10 social media. You could talk about this stuff for days, but also in not really being able to teach it in the way that I used to. I've learned to restrain my geekiness a little bit. Like if I have one win with teaching 2 students to be content editors on a Humans of Strathaven account, having them come up with the list of hashtags and scheduling it out for a whole school year, like, okay, I'm going to celebrate that. We're not where I used to be, but that's something worth celebrating.
Yeah, that is. Well, thank you so much. This was great.
All right.
Obviously, we're already asking for your help, so you might get like at least 9 emails.
That's fine. That's fine.
But thank you so much. This was great.
Thank y'all.
Have a great
Talk to you later. Yeah, it was a good start to a Tuesday. And Erin, thank you again for not letting me follow my gut impulse. Okay, it was a real conversation. So, all right, have a good day, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, guys.